My mother's voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Shut up," she barked, as if my tears were an offense. Beside her, my brother laughed, sharp and cruel, like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life. For years, I thought family was my refuge, the place I could collapse and still be safe. I never imagined they'd be the ones to destroy me. But that night, as the therapist sat quietly in the corner, watching, I felt a shift. Something inside me cracked open. I realized I wasn't powerless anymore. I was preparing for war. It was 2:03 a.m. when the phone jolted me awake. My mother's name glowed on the screen, and before I could even whisper hello, her voice flooded the room with trembling desperation. "Emily, I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "Your father doesn't care. Your brother never helps. You're the only one I can count on. Please, I need money. Just a little, just to get us through this week." Half asleep, I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, heart racing with that old familiar cocktail of guilt and duty. I told myself what I had always believed. Family comes first. If they needed me, I couldn't say no. It was almost a reflex, like breathing. My mother's tears twisted inside me until I said the words she was waiting for. "Okay, Mom, I'll send what I can in the morning." The relief in her sigh was immediate, heavy. "You're my angel, Emily. Don't tell your brother. He doesn't understand me like you do." And then the line went dead, leaving me in the darkness with a hollow pit in my chest. I lay there staring at the ceiling, wondering how many more nights I'd lose to her emergencies. Yet some part of me still whispered, "This is love. This is what good daughters do." But when I set the phone down, another notification buzzed. A text, my brother. Just 4 words, typed like a dagger. "Don't think you matter." I stared at it until the letters blurred, unsure which stung worse, my mother's need or my brother's cruelty. The next morning, I brushed off the heaviness with coffee and routine. But fragments of that night clung to me like cobwebs. I told myself my brother was joking. I told myself my mother was struggling. I told myself this was family. And yet, something gnawed at me. Over the following weeks, the patterns sharpened. My mother's late-night calls became predictable, a script I could recite before she spoke. The tears, the helplessness, the subtle reminder that I was all she had. My brother, meanwhile, perfected a different performance. At dinners, he'd mock me under his breath. "Emily's the bank, didn't you know?" He'd chuckle, and the table would laugh while my cheeks burned. When I protested, he'd smirk. "You're too sensitive, lighten up." Gaslighting. That was the word I didn't yet have the courage to use. Every jab left me questioning myself. Maybe I was too sensitive. Maybe I was imagining the coldness in my father's silence whenever these moments unfolded. He sat there, eyes on his plate, lips pressed tight, as if neutrality absolved him. But neutrality was its own kind of betrayal. And then came the group chat. I discovered it by accident, scrolling through my brother's phone when he carelessly left it unlocked on the kitchen counter. My name wasn't in the chat list, but I saw it there, family only. Inside, message after message dissected me like I was an inconvenience rather than blood. Emily's overreacting again. She thinks she's better than us. Just smile and she'll keep paying. I shut the screen so fast it almost slipped from my hands. My pulse hammered as though I had stolen a secret meant to stay buried. And maybe I had. But how could I ignore the truth once I'd seen it? I didn't confront them, not yet. Instead, I sat with the knowledge, let it fester. Nights grew heavier. I replayed every conversation, every cruel laugh, every silence from my father, and a question began to take shape. Not just about them, but about me. How many red flags had I ignored? How many times had I swallowed my instincts just to keep the illusion of family alive? Tell me, have you ever done the same? Have you ever convinced yourself that cruelty was just teasing, that silence was just indifference, that betrayal was just misunderstanding? That's the trick of toxic love. It blinds you while it bleeds you. The breaking point hadn't come yet, but I could feel it gathering like a storm on the horizon. My mother's tears, my brother's laughter, my father's silence, they weren't isolated moments. They were threads in a web, one that had been tightening around me for years. And for the first time, I caught myself thinking, maybe love doesn't look like this. Maybe loyalty isn't supposed to feel like chains. Still, I wasn't ready to break free. Not yet. I told myself I could handle it, that if I stayed quiet, they would change. But deep down, I knew the truth. The worst betrayal hadn't arrived. It was only just beginning. My 35th birthday should have felt like a milestone, a moment to breathe, to celebrate the life I'd built despite the shadows. Instead, it became the night the ground gave way beneath me. The living room was filled with voices, cake candles flickering, and for a brief second, I allowed myself to believe I belonged. My mother kissed my cheek. My brother handed me a box with a crooked smile. But something was wrong. When I unwrapped the gift, an old mug from the kitchen cabinet, chipped at the rim, his laughter burst out. "Don't say I never gave you anything," he sneered. The room chuckled along. I tried to smile, my stomach twisting. Then I noticed them glancing at their phones, stifling smirks. Later that night, alone in the kitchen with dirty plates piled around me, I picked up my mother's phone to silence its buzzing. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. The same group chat I'd seen weeks earlier stared back at me, only this time I read further. Message after message written today, on my birthday. "Don't forget to laugh at the mug. She'll think it's special. Let's see how long she plays along." The room spun. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the phone. My mother walked in, saw me holding it, and froze. For a second, I thought she would apologize, explain. Instead, she turned away, murmuring, "You shouldn't go through other people's things." My brother, appearing behind her, smirked wide. "Caught you snooping again, Em? Classic." His laughter echoed in my chest like glass shattering. I held the phone out, screen glowing with their words, waiting for denial, for shame, anything. My father entered, glanced at the scene, then returned to his chair without a word. Silence was his weapon, and it cut deeper than their cruelty. When they all left, I collapsed on the bathroom floor. Tears blurred my reflection in the mirror. It wasn't just the mug, or the messages, or their silence. It was the realization that every sacrifice I had made meant nothing to them. I wasn't family, I was a target. I don't know how long I stayed there, knees drawn to my chest, sobbing into the tile. The world felt small, suffocating. But in the middle of that collapse, my phone buzzed. A notification. A message from an unknown number. I wiped my eyes and opened it. It was a screenshot, another piece of that group chat. This one worse, crueler. My brother's words, "She's pathetic. Let's keep her around until she dries up. Then she'll see how little she matters." Someone inside the family had sent it to me, a traitor among traitors. For the first time, Anger cut through the fog of grief. They wanted me to break. But I felt something else rising instead. That night, I looked in the mirror again, face swollen from crying, and whispered aloud, "No more. I'm not your puppet. I'm not your fool." The words felt strange, shaky, but real. A seed of defiance took root. The next week, while scrolling through my bank app, another truth smacked me hard. A savings account, one I hadn't known existed, linked to my parents' names. Transactions that made no sense, withdrawals tied to my own contributions, money funneled without my knowledge. My breath caught. They hadn't just mocked me, they'd been stealing from me. I sat frozen, the app glowing like a spotlight on years of deception. Every late-night call, every urgent plea for money, every emergency my mother cried about. It was all calculated. They had siphoned off my trust $1 at a time. When I finally told my therapist, expecting him to tell me I was overreacting, he didn't. He leaned forward, calm but firm. "Emily, what you've discovered isn't an accident. It's a pattern. You need to protect yourself. Start documenting everything: messages, calls, financial records. Don't confront them yet. Build your case." I stared at him, stunned. He wasn't dismissing me. He was arming me. His words were a lifeline, a strategy. For the first time in months, I felt the ground steady beneath me. Walking out of his office, the city lights looked different, sharper, purposeful. My family thought I was still their pawn. They had no idea the game had changed. But what I didn't know, as I clutched my phone and began saving every shred of evidence, was that my therapist held a secret too. A truth that would alter everything once it surfaced. And when it did, the real war would begin. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with a notebook and my laptop, determined not to collapse again. My therapist's words echoed in my mind: document everything. It became my mantra. I started with the simplest steps: recording late-night calls, saving bank statements, archiving emails. Every click, every screenshot, every recorded voicemail was a piece of armor I was building around myself. The first time I pressed record on my phone, during one of my mother's midnight pleas, my hands trembled so violently I almost dropped it. She was shouting, accusing me of being selfish for not sending money fast enough. Listening later, in the quiet of my apartment, I flinched at the venom in her voice. "You think you're better than us, Emily. You'll end up alone." Hearing it played back was different. It stripped away the excuses I'd always made for her. It was undeniable evidence. Emails came next. I searched my inbox and found threads I'd ignored. Subtle manipulations buried between lines of affection. "We know you'll do the right thing, you always do," my brother had written, cloaking demand as praise. When stacked together, the pattern was unmistakable. Then came the banking trail. Hours turned into nights as I combed through years of statements, cross-checking deposits and withdrawals. A story unfolded in numbers, funds redirected, unexplained transfers, my own savings quietly drained. Rage sat heavy in my chest, but beneath it was clarity. They had built their security on my sacrifices, and then out of nowhere came the twist. An iCloud notification flashed across my laptop. Someone had shared a folder with me. Inside, I found hundreds of messages, a digital time capsule of their cruelty. Conversations from the family group chat I'd never been meant to see. "Keep her busy with guilt. She'll cave if you cry. She's too dumb to notice the money missing." My breath hitched as I scrolled. every word proof of the conspiracy I had suspected but never fully grasped. I shut the screen, heart pounding. My body shook as though I'd been physically struck. I put on the first recording again, my mother's voice snarling through the phone. Sitting alone in my apartment, I pressed my hands to my ears and wept. It wasn't just betrayal, it was confirmation. Everything I'd feared was real. For a long time, I sat there, curled on the couch, feeling the weight of years collapse onto my chest. Then my phone buzzed, a message from my therapist. "There's something you haven't seen yet." Those words pulled me upright. There was more. My evidence wasn't the whole story. A shiver crawled through me, half dread, half anticipation. In the weeks that followed, I built what I began calling my survival network. My therapist was the anchor, guiding me not only through strategy, but through the emotional wreckage. He taught me how to separate feeling from fact, how to steady my breath before decisions. I hired a lawyer, recommended by a colleague I trusted. She listened without judgment, her pen scratching notes as I poured out years of manipulation. "This isn't just a toxic family," she said firmly. "This is financial exploitation. We'll need to move carefully, but you have a case." Friends I'd kept at arm's length for fear of burdening them stepped in with unexpected loyalty. "You're not crazy, Em," one told me. "We've seen how they treat you." Their validation soothed wounds I hadn't realized were still bleeding. Then came the most shocking ally, a distant cousin, one I'd barely spoken to at family gatherings. He reached out after hearing whispers of tension. Over coffee, he leaned forward and said quietly, "Your father has been working with your brother. They plan to cut you out of the will entirely. I thought you should know." His words landed like ice in my stomach. My father, the silent observer, wasn't neutral after all. He was complicit. My chest ached with the betrayal, sharper than my brother's laughter, colder than my mother's screams. Somehow it hurt worse to know he had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. Still, there was strength in numbers. For every wound, there was a salve. My therapist's steady guidance, my lawyer's sharp determination, my friend's unwavering belief, the cousin's courage. They lifted me higher, only for the next revelation to drag me lower again. It was a pendulum of hope and despair, each swing carving me into something stronger. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, my therapist placed a folder on the table between us. His eyes held mine, calm but intense. "Inside this," he said, "is the truth that will change everything you think you know about your family." I stared at it, pulse quickening, fingers twitching but frozen. The war I thought I was preparing for hadn't even started. The air in the therapist's office was heavier than usual, the silence brittle like glass waiting to shatter. My parents sat side by side, rigid, while my brother leaned back, with a smirk that had become his permanent expression. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. This wasn't going to be another session of hollow words and empty apologies. My therapist opened a folder, the same one he had shown me days earlier, and placed it on the table. His voice was steady, deliberate. "Today, we need to look at something real, something everyone here has contributed to." He slid a packet of papers across the table. Bank records, transfers, my own money siphoned into accounts I hadn't known existed. My mother's face paled, my father shifted in his seat. "And then," the therapist continued, pressing a button on his tablet, "there are these." A projector hummed, filling the wall with lines of text, screenshots from the family group chat. Words blazed across the screen. Keep her busy with guilt. She'll always pay. She doesn't matter. I felt the blood rush from my face, but for once I didn't crumble. I sat upright, watching as my family's secret life unfolded in front of them. My brother's smirk faltered, then twisted into a scowl. "This is ridiculous," he barked. "She stole those messages." "No," the therapist said calmly. "They were shared with her, and now they're part of the record." The tension snapped like a whip. My mother covered her mouth, whispering, "Who showed her?" My father glared at the table, refusing to meet anyone's eyes. My brother slammed his fist against the arm of his chair, his voice rising to a roar. "You don't know everything, Emily. You don't know what's really going on." The words rang in my ears, part threat, part confession, micro cliffhanger, a crack in his arrogance. I didn't respond, not yet. The session ended in chaos, raised voices, slammed doors, my brother's fury trailing into the hallway. But it was only the beginning. Within days, the counterattack arrived. A smear campaign spread like wildfire. My brother told anyone who would listen that I was unstable, delusional. My mother whispered to relatives that therapy had filled my head with lies. My father, silent as ever, allowed their story to harden like concrete. Then came the social media posts, cryptic but pointed. "Some people will do anything for attention. Money changes people." Comments piled up, some sympathetic, others cruel. My phone buzzed with notifications until I silenced it altogether. For a moment, their plan worked. I felt the old doubt creeping back in. Was I losing my mind? Was I the villain after all? I curled into bed, scrolling through their words, feeling the weight of public shame press against my chest. And then, unexpectedly, something shifted. A video surfaced online, grainy but unmistakable. My mother's voice, shrill and sharp, shouting at me, "Shut up." My brother's laugh followed, cruel and cutting. The clip spread fast, reshared again and again with captions like "toxic family caught on tape." I didn't release it, someone else had. And while part of me recoiled at the exposure, another part exhaled in relief. The world could finally see what I had endured. Support poured in from strangers, comments of solidarity, stories of their own betrayals. For the first time, I wasn't just alone in my pain. I was part of something bigger. A chorus of voices refusing to be silenced. Still, the whiplash of emotions left me raw. One moment I was buoyed by encouragement. The next I was gutted by the fact that millions now knew my humiliation. I sat by the window late at night, watching city lights flicker, whispering to myself, "You're not crazy, you're not alone." It became a fragile kind of comfort, but the battle wasn't over. One evening, as I met with my lawyer, her phone buzzed with an incoming email. She frowned, opened it, then slid the screen toward me. The sender was anonymous. The subject line read, "For Emily." Attached was a single document. My hands trembled as I opened it. The evidence inside made everything I'd seen so far look small. And with it, the war shifted again. The anonymous email was the spark that lit the fire. My lawyer read through the files with a tightening jaw, then looked up at me. "Emily, this isn't just family drama anymore. This is criminal." Within weeks, subpoenas were issued. Investigators pored over bank accounts, property deeds, financial transfers. Every lie my family had spun unraveled under scrutiny. My brother's arrogance curdled into silence, when the evidence stacked too high to deny. My mother feigned frailty, clutching tissues, murmuring that she never understood the details. But the documents spoke louder than her tears. The biggest shock came when investigators turned their attention to my father. For years he had hidden behind silence, a passive figure who pretended to be above the conflict. But the records revealed something else entirely: shell accounts, secret business deals, and transactions that hinted at fraud. He hadn't just allowed the theft, he had orchestrated parts of it. The man I once begged for protection was exposed as a willing architect of betrayal. I sat in the courthouse as the findings were read aloud, my body frozen, my mind spinning. The vindication I thought I wanted felt hollow, because even as the truth emerged, it came with a cost I hadn't anticipated. The family I had clung to, defended, sacrificed for, they were gone. Maybe they had been gone long before, and I was only now acknowledging it. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at old photographs, smiling faces, vacations, birthdays, holidays. I touched one picture where my father's hand rested on my shoulder, my mother's laugh frozen in time. My chest ached with something deeper than anger. Even in victory, I had lost something permanent. But life has a way of shifting when you least expect it. Days after the hearings began, I received a call from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. His voice was trembling. "Emily, I'm sorry. I knew some of what they were doing, but I didn't realize how deep it went. I have documents, emails, notes, things they told me to keep quiet. I can't carry it anymore." When we met, he slid a folder across the table, his eyes full of guilt. Inside were handwritten notes from my father, instructions to funnel funds, messages coordinating with my brother. The betrayal stung, but the allyship soothed. For the first time, a member of my bloodline chose truth over silence. It was both a wound and a balm. The case grew stronger. My lawyer smiled grimly as she stacked the evidence higher and higher. And finally, after months of hearings, depositions, and battles behind closed doors, the tide turned decisively. My family was stripped of control, forced to answer for their crimes. Accounts were frozen, reputations dismantled, whispers spreading through the community that once revered them. And for me, there was release. The day the verdict came, I walked out of the courthouse into crisp air, feeling lighter than I had in years. People who had doubted me, who had whispered behind my back, now looked at me differently, some with pity, others with admiration. And strangers reached out, telling me my fight had given them courage to confront their own toxic families. I hadn't just won for myself. I had cracked something open for others too. Then the unexpected happened. Late one evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Her voice, once sharp and commanding, was soft, broken. "Emily," she whispered, "I never wanted this. I didn't know how to stop it." On the other end of the line, I heard her crying quietly. The sound twisted inside me. Once I would have rushed to comfort her. Once I would have believed her, but not anymore. I listened, silent, my heart heavy but resolute. When she asked if I hated her, I answered truthfully, "No, Mom, I don't hate you, but I don't trust you, and I can't come back." I hung up before the old patterns could reel me in again. The tears came later, not for her, but for the finality of it all. Justice had come, but healing was something else entirely. I wondered if it was possible to rebuild trust where betrayal had been the foundation. As I lay in bed that night, Staring at the ceiling, I whispered to the darkness, "Justice has arrived, but can it really heal?" In the weeks after the verdict, I felt a silence I had never known before. No more midnight calls, no more cruel laughter, no more messages designed to break me down. For the first time, the noise of my family's demands was gone. It was terrifying at first, like stepping into a void. But slowly, I realized it was freedom. I began the hard work of building boundaries, not just walls, but unshakable lines that no one would cross again. I blocked numbers, deleted old threads, and gave instructions to my lawyer. No contact, no exceptions. If they wanted to reach me, it would be through the system, not through guilt or manipulation. The decision left me shaking with both fear and relief. But each day of silence that followed confirmed I had chosen life over chains. Financial independence came next. I opened new accounts, worked closely with advisors, and for the first time, invested in myself rather than pouring into their endless appetites. My career, long neglected in the fog of obligation, began to thrive. I said yes to opportunities I once would have turned down out of fear that my family would disapprove. And in saying yes to myself, doors opened. But the most surprising gift was finding my chosen family. Friends who had once been background figures stepped forward, offering loyalty that blood had denied me. A colleague who invited me to weekly dinners. Neighbors who checked in without expecting anything in return. Even strangers online who shared their own stories of surviving toxic homes. Piece by piece, I began to stitch together a new definition of family, one based on trust, respect, and love freely given. One morning, as dawn spilled across the horizon, I sat on my balcony with a mug of coffee. The city stretched beneath me, restless and alive, yet I felt a peace I hadn't known in decades. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and whispered to myself, I survived. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of everything I had endured. For once, they didn't feel like defiance. They felt like truth. With that truth came the courage to share my story. When a friend suggested starting a podcast, I hesitated. Did I want to reopen wounds in public? But the more I thought about the messages I had received from strangers, the more I realized that silence had been my prison. Speaking might be my freedom. The first episode was raw, my voice trembling as I recounted the night my mother told me to shut up. The laughter that followed, the betrayal I discovered. I didn't dress it up, didn't sanitize the pain, and people listened. Messages poured in. Others who had endured manipulation, who had been cast as villains in their own families' stories. Some wrote, "You said the words I never could." Others whispered simply, "Thank you." The podcast grew, not into fame, but into a community. Survivors spoke their truths, finding solace in being heard. In giving them a voice, I found my own. And then came the twist I never saw coming. One afternoon, after recording, my therapist asked if he could speak off the record. His expression was different, softer, almost vulnerable. He told me that he too had grown up in a toxic home, that the reason he had understood my pain so deeply was because he had lived it himself. He had sat in the same darkness, felt the same betrayal, carried the same scars. The revelation struck me silent. All this time I had thought of him as a guide, standing on solid ground while I flailed in quicksand. But he had been there too, once, and maybe that was why he had never given up on me. Because in helping me fight my way out, he was honoring the battles he had once fought alone. For the first time, I looked at him not just as a therapist, but as a fellow survivor. And in that recognition, I felt the final weight lift. I wasn't broken. I wasn't cursed. I was part of something larger, a lineage of survivors who had refused to let betrayal define them. The closing chapter of my story isn't about revenge or even justice. It's about rebirth, standing taller, breathing deeper, daring to dream of a future that isn't haunted by the past. They tried to destroy me. They stripped me of trust, of security, of belonging. But from the ashes I rose. And now, as I tell my story to anyone who needs to hear it, I end with the same truth I carry inside me every day. They once destroyed me, but from those ruins I was reborn.